My name is Margaret Elwood. I'm 63 years old, a retired librarian from a small town in Missouri, and until recently, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my only son. Gabriel had always been quiet, thoughtful, the kind of child who never caused a stir. He grew into a man who preferred silence over confrontation, solitude over spectacle. I respected that, until the silence became a wall, and that wall became a locked gate. 3 years ago, after he bought a small farm up in Vermont, he looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, please, don't ever visit that place." His voice was firm, final. I remember the way his fingers trembled, just slightly, as he passed me a photo of Owen, his son, my grandson, standing by a weathered red barn. That was the last time Gabriel ever mentioned the farm. He never invited me, never showed me pictures, never even gave me the address. When Gabriel died, it felt like the air had been knocked from my lungs. A sudden accident, they said. A storm, a tree, a truck that didn't slow down in time. I was left with a funeral to plan, a grandson to comfort, and a grief that clung to my bones. Then, 2 weeks after the funeral, his lawyer, an older man named Walter Denby, called and asked me to meet him at his office. There, on a polished desk that smelled faintly of lemon oil, he slid a small wooden box toward me. Inside was a folded letter, a silver key shaped like a kestrel in flight, and a property deed. "I plan to sell it," I told him. "I have no need for land in Vermont." Walter nodded. "That's your right, ma'am, but Gabriel left a note. He said you might change your mind. He hoped you would." I didn't open the letter that day. I wasn't ready. I slipped the key into my pocket, told myself I'd deal with it later, and left the office feeling like a door had creaked open behind me, and I didn't want to look back. But curiosity is a quiet voice, one that grows louder with time. And so, 4 days later, I packed a small suitcase, asked a neighbor to watch the house, and boarded a train headed north. The drive from the station to the farm took nearly an hour through winding roads flanked by pine trees and stubborn patches of snow that refused to melt, even in April. By the time I reached the wrought iron gate that read Kestrel Ridge, the sky had turned a soft steel gray. I parked, stepped out, and stood there, hand resting on the cold metal, staring up at a farmhouse that had lived only in my imagination. It was smaller than I'd pictured. Older. The barn beside it leaned slightly as though exhausted, but the front door, painted blue, chipped at the edges, seemed to wait for me. I walked slowly up the path. My heart beat louder than my footsteps. My son forbade me to visit his farm. After he died, his lawyer handed me the keys. I planned to sell it, but curiosity got the better of me. When I opened the door, I froze, because what I saw inside, the door, creaked on its hinges. A gust of cold air greeted me, followed by the scent of cedarwood and something faintly floral, lavender, maybe. The room was dim. Dust motes danced in the light cutting through the curtained window. And then I saw them. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Taped along the walls, strung across twine lines like holiday garlands, pinned to bulletin boards and framed on shelves. Every single one was of me. Or Owen. Me in the kitchen, reading to Owen on the porch, holding his hand as we crossed the street. Some I remembered. Some I didn't even know had been taken. There were drawings, too, childlike sketches in Owen's hand. One showed the three of us standing under a tree. Gabriel had written little notes beneath some of the photos. Mom teaching Owen to tie his shoes. Owen laughing at her soup slurping. Sunday at the lake. She always brings too many sandwiches. And then the screen on the far wall lit up. A video began to play. Gabriel sat in the frame, a little older, face leaner than I remembered. He looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, Mom," he said, "then I'm gone. I'm sorry. I didn't want to leave things like this, but I needed you to see this place, because I built it for you." I dropped into the worn armchair behind me. The video continued, his voice trembling at times, but sure. He spoke about the years he spent here, about healing, about trying to build something that felt safe for Owen and for me. He said he knew he had been distant, that he was afraid to show weakness, that this farm had once been a place of pain, but he'd reclaimed it as a sanctuary. I didn't let you come here, he said, and because I wasn't ready. But now, I want you to know I saw everything, every sacrifice, every bedtime story, every time you held us together when I was falling apart. This place, it's yours now. I sat there for a long time, watching, crying, laughing through tears at memories I didn't know he'd kept. Gabriel was gone. But inside these walls, in every photo, every recorded word, every line of Owen's crayon drawings, he lived, he remembered, he loved. And suddenly, the farm didn't feel like a stranger's property anymore. It felt like a final letter, a hidden heart, a place waiting to speak. If you've ever lost someone and found yourself asking questions too late, you're not alone. I didn't come here looking for answers. I came to close a door. Instead, I opened one and walked into a room full of love that had been waiting quietly all along. 3 years before that letter found its way into my hands, Gabriel had stood in my kitchen with the stiffness of someone preparing to say something they knew would hurt. It was early spring then, just after Owen's 5th birthday. I remember the way the morning sun streaked across the counter, catching on the rim of Gabriel's coffee cup, untouched. He hadn't come by often in those days. Since moving out of state, our visits had become brief, measured things. Always polite, always warm, but never quite deep. Still, I hadn't expected what he said that day. "Mom," he began, eyes on the floor, "I'm buying some land in Vermont, a small place. Quiet. For Owen and me." I smiled then, trying to make light of it. "A farm? You always hated chores growing up." He didn't laugh. Instead, he took a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, slid it across the table to me. It was the deed to a property, Kestrel Ridge, and scrawled across the bottom was something that froze my breath. "Please, never come here. I need you to promise." I looked up sharply. "Gabriel, what are you talking about?" He sat down finally. His hands clasped together were shaking. "There are things I need to work through," he said, voice tight. "I need space. I need Owen to grow up differently. And I need you to trust me." Trust. That word felt like a trap. I had always trusted Gabriel. With my heart, my hopes, my grief after his father passed, I'd given him everything I knew how to give. But this sounded like exile. Still, I saw the storm in his eyes. And as a mother, I'd learned when to push and when to step back. "I don't understand," I said quietly, "but I promise." He reached out and touched my hand just for a second. "Thank you," he whispered. After he left that morning, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen and stared at the window for a long time. My heart felt like it had swallowed a stone. I told myself it was just a phase, an attempt at independence, maybe even self-protection. I believed he would call again in a week, maybe 2, that the wall would lower, that I'd be allowed in, but that call never came. The months passed. I mailed birthday cards to Owen, packages with books and knitted scarves. Gabriel would reply with short thank you notes, always kind, always signed with love, but they held the emptiness of a closed door. I never saw a return address, just a postmark from somewhere in Windham County. When Owen came to visit during holidays, he stayed only briefly. Sweet boy, gentle eyes, but quiet, always quiet. He never mentioned the farm, and I never asked. And then, without warning, everything changed. The phone rang one Thursday morning in late March, a stranger's voice, a woman, clinical and soft-spoken. "There's been an accident," she said. "Your son didn't make it. His son, Owen, is with neighbors for now." The world tilted. I remember the sound of my mug shattering on the floor, the coffee spreading like ink across the tile. I remember my knees giving way, the cold of the linoleum against my skin, but I don't remember screaming. Not out loud. The funeral was a blur. There were people I didn't know, faces from Gabriel's work, a few neighbors. Owen sat beside me, his small hand wrapped in mine. He didn't cry. Not once. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the last photo I had of Gabriel and Owen together. My son's arm was draped around his boy's shoulders. They were standing in front of a barn, the roof sagging, a kestrel-shaped weather vane turning in the wind. That was the first time I allowed myself to wonder what had happened behind the walls of Kestrel Ridge. Why had Gabriel hidden it from me so completely? Why did he look so tired in that photo, even though he was smiling? What was he shielding me from, or shielding himself against? I didn't have answers, only questions, and one promise that had lost its anchor the moment he died. Now that he was gone, was I still bound by it? The night before I went to see Walter Denby, I sat in the living room with Owen asleep upstairs. I pulled out Gabriel's letter, the one from the wooden box I'd left unopened for days. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal. The paper smelled like cedar and thyme. His handwriting, careful, neat, but slanted slightly to the left like it always had been, felt like a voice returned from silence. Mom, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to explain. I'm sorry for everything I kept from you, but I need you to understand. Kestrel Ridge was never meant to be a mystery. It was meant to be a gift when the time was right. I know I asked you never to come. I had my reasons. But now I need you to go. I need you to see it, to know what I built there and why. The key is yours. The land is yours. Do with it what you will. But please, don't sell it before you step inside. That was the moment my grief shifted. It didn't lessen, but it changed shape. I wasn't just a mother who had lost her son. I was a keeper of something unfinished, a promise he'd made to himself, a door he'd once begged me not to open, now asking me to cross its threshold. Walter Denby's office sat above an old hardware store in town, the kind of place that still had a bell above the door and smelled faintly of paper, wood polish, and dust. I'd known Walter for years, though never closely. He had handled some paperwork for my late husband decades ago. Now he looked older, a little slower, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He didn't say much when I walked in, just offered me a seat across from his desk and slid a small wooden box toward me. "This came with the will," he said, voice low. He left no instructions beyond one request, that you open it alone. I ran my fingers along the lid. It was smooth, hand-carved, the grain of the wood dark and tight. A tiny brass latch kept it shut. I unhooked it slowly, almost afraid of what I might find. Inside lay 3 things: a key, a folded envelope sealed with dark red wax, and a photograph. The key was beautiful in its own way, silver, heavy, and shaped at the top like a bird in flight, a kestrel. Its wings spread wide, the feathers etched with intricate lines. It didn't look like any house key I'd ever seen. It looked ceremonial. I picked up the photo next. It was a picture of Gabriel as a boy, maybe 12 or 13, standing in front of a tall wooden fence. His expression was blank, arms crossed, mouth drawn into a line I didn't recognize. The edges of the photo were curled slightly, like it had been carried around for years. And then there was the letter. I'd read it the night before, in the quiet of my living room, and I could almost hear his voice as I unfolded it again in front of Walter. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't have to. The words had already etched themselves into my memory. Kestrel Ridge was never meant to be a mystery. It was meant to be a gift, when the time was right. Now he was gone, and the time had come. I looked up at Walter. "How long have you known about this?" His mouth pressed into a line. Gabriel came to see me about a year ago, said he wanted to make sure the property went to you and Owen. He asked me to hold on to the box until, well, he cleared his throat. I didn't ask questions, and he didn't offer answers. I stared at the key again. There was something sacred about it, something heavy with meaning, as if it could unlock more than just a door. "What's the property like?" I asked. Walter hesitated. "Remote. About 40 acres. A house, a barn. He'd renovated some of it, but it's quiet. Secluded." My first instinct was still to sell. I didn't need land. I didn't need a mystery. What I needed was time to grieve, to help Owen feel safe again, to understand how I was supposed to fill the space Gabriel had left behind. But there was a tug now, deep in my chest, one I couldn't ignore. "Did he ever say why he didn't want me there?" I asked. Walter shook his head slowly. "He said it wasn't ready, that's all." I tucked the box under my arm as I stood. The weight of it felt different now, like a question that had waited patiently for an answer. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky had that heavy gray color that comes before spring rain. I walked slowly back to my car, the photograph and letter resting inside the box, the key tucked into my coat pocket like it had always belonged there. At home, Owen was curled on the couch with a blanket and a stack of old picture books. He looked up when I came in, eyes tired but curious. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the box. "Something your daddy left for me," I said, setting it gently on the table. He didn't ask more. Owen had inherited his father's quiet. That night, after putting him to bed, I opened a map and traced my finger along the roads leading from Missouri to Vermont. I'd never driven that far alone before. The idea made my hands sweat, but something in me had already decided. I wouldn't sell. Not yet. I needed to see it first, to stand where Gabriel had stood, to understand what he'd built in the silence he never explained. I packed lightly. Just a few clothes, Gabriel's letter, the photo, and the key. Before I zipped up my bag, I looked again at the kestrel on the key. A bird of prey, yes, but also a symbol of sharp vision and quiet strength. I couldn't know then what I would find at Kestrel Ridge, but I knew this much. He hadn't left it for me out of obligation. He'd left it out of hope. Hope that something broken might be mended. Hope that I could step through the door he'd once begged me to avoid and choose not to turn away. The road to Vermont stretched like a ribbon of memory, winding through valleys and past trees that still held the skeletal limbs of winter. I left before sunrise, the box resting on the passenger seat beside me like a quiet companion. Every so often, I'd glance at the silver kestrel key nestled inside, its wings outstretched as if in flight. I hadn't told anyone I was going, not Owen, not my sister in Kansas City, not the neighbor who occasionally brought over soup. It wasn't secrecy. It was something softer. I needed to meet this place on my own terms before the world touched it. The drive was long. Missouri flattened out into Illinois, and by the time I reached New York, the air had changed. It smelled like wet stone and moss, a kind of cold that settled deep in your lungs. When I crossed into Vermont, the mountains rose up like quiet sentinels, ancient and still. The further I drove, the more the outside world seemed to dissolve behind me. I followed Gabriel's instructions to the letter. Turn at the white church with the cracked bell. Continue past the covered bridge. Count 2 mailboxes after the orchard road. It felt like a scavenger hunt built from pieces of his life I had never seen. And then, just beyond a bend in the road, there it was, Kestrel Ridge. The gate was iron, worn but sturdy, the name arched above it in looping script. It was partially open, as if waiting for someone. I stepped out of the car and stood for a long moment with my gloved hand resting on the cold metal. My breath came in small clouds. The silence was deep, not empty, but expectant. The property stretched far beyond what I could see. Pines lined the edges like a natural wall. In the near distance stood the farmhouse, 2 stories tall, painted a gentle gray with blue shutters. The barn to its right leaned slightly but held its dignity. A weather vane in the shape of a kestrel spun lazily in the breeze atop the cupola. I opened the gate slowly and drove through, the gravel crunching beneath my tires like brittle leaves. Parking near the house, I cut the engine and sat in stillness. The box was on my lap. I held the key in my hand, the weight of it grounding me. I thought of Gabriel as a boy, how he used to line up his toy animals along the hallway and tell stories to them before bed. I thought of him as a teenager, pulling away after his father died, choosing solitude over conversation. I thought of the day he became a father himself, how his face had changed when he held Owen for the first time. Softer, afraid, maybe, but fiercely present. And I thought of the day he asked me not to come here. The tension in his voice, the ache in mine when I said yes. Now I was here, at the edge of something I couldn't yet name. I got out of the car and walked the path to the porch. The wood creaked under my boots. The blue door stood straight ahead, a brass handle catching the light. My fingers hovered over the lock, then reached into my coat pocket. The key slid in without resistance. I turned it. The door opened. Inside, the air was cold but not lifeless. It smelled like cedar and old books, with a faint trace of lavender. I stepped into a small entryway, the floor polished and clean. A coat hung on the hook to my left, one I recognized from a photo of Gabriel and Owen at the fair. Brown wool, torn at the elbow. I moved further in. To my right was a living room, simple furniture, a stone fireplace, books stacked in neat towers, not yet shelved. Framed photographs lined the mantel. My breath caught as I stepped closer. It was me, holding Owen's hand at the zoo, reading to him beneath a tree, laughing beside him in the kitchen. Photos I didn't remember being taken, moments I hadn't known were saved. There were notes beneath them written in Gabriel's hand. She always made it okay. She never let go. She forgave everything. I didn't know I was crying until my hand touched my cheek. Past the living room, I found a hallway lined with sketches. Crayon drawings, most likely Owen's. One was a picture of the three of us. Me with my gray bun. Gabriel tall and smiling. Owen with a kite. In the sky above us, a bird flew high, its wings wide, its beak open. I kept walking. A kettle sat on the stove. A loaf of bread, covered in a cloth, rested beside it. The fridge hummed softly. The house wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for me. Outside the kitchen window, I saw a small lake, still partially frozen. Pines surrounded it like guardians. A bench sat at the edge of the water. The view must have been Gabriel's favorite. It would have been mine. I returned to the entryway and picked up the letter again, pressing it to my chest. My heart beat against it like a drum. The silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt like love that had been preserved, waiting to be unwrapped, piece by piece. I sat on the edge of the old sofa, the key still in my palm, and looked around. This was not a house haunted by grief. It was a home filled with memory. I spent the night on the old sofa in the living room, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of pine and chamomile. Sleep came in pieces, soft and jagged. I kept waking to the sound of wind tapping against the windows, the creak of wooden beams settling above me. But there was no fear, only a strange sense of presence, as though the walls themselves remembered. When morning light spilled across the floor, I rose quietly, wrapped the quilt tighter around my shoulders, and moved through the house like I was walking through someone else's dream. Only it wasn't someone else's. It was mine. Or maybe it was Gabriel's, and now it had been passed on to me. In the kitchen, I boiled water for tea. There was a small tin of Earl Grey tucked behind a row of glass jars labeled in Gabriel's handwriting: thyme, rosemary, turmeric. The mundane details of his life unfolded like small gifts, evidence of how he lived, what he cared about. He'd been building a world here, piece by piece, and he had never told me. After breakfast, I wandered back into the living room. That's when I noticed the black rectangle tucked into the corner shelf, an old digital photo frame. I pressed the side button. It flickered to life. At first, I saw a slideshow of photos. Gabriel teaching Owen how to ride a bike down a gravel path, Owen holding a pumpkin twice his size, the two of them building a snowman. I watched, tears in my throat, as season after season of their life passed in still images. And then the screen went dark. A video began to play. Gabriel sat in a chair I hadn't seen in the house yet, probably up in the attic or a back room. He was wearing the same brown wool coat I'd passed the night before, the torn elbow patched clumsily. He looked tired, thinner, but his eyes held something softer than I remembered, a kind of peace. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stopped breathing. "I don't know when you'll find this. Maybe it's been days, maybe years. But if you're watching, you made it. You're here. And that means something." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic from childhood. "I never really talked about Kestrel Ridge with you, and I'm sorry for that. I wasn't trying to shut you out. I was just trying to hold something together long enough to make it real." He looked away, then back at the camera. "This place, it's complicated. It wasn't always mine. It belonged to Dad's father, Melvin. You probably remember, cold man, stricter than steel." I nodded unconsciously, though he couldn't see me. "He sent me here once, just once. I was 12. You thought I was at a summer camp, but it was more like a correctional place, a reform farm, they called it. They didn't hit us, but they knew how to break a kid down without touching him. Long hours, silence as punishment, cold meals, colder mornings." He paused. "I hated it. But when I got older, I realized something. Pain leaves a shape in you, and if you don't face it, it becomes everything. I bought this place because I wanted to change that shape. I wanted it to hold something else." His voice cracked. "I built this house into a home. Not perfect, but full of moments with Owen. I kept photos of you everywhere, because I needed to remember who taught me love wasn't something earned. It was something offered, again and again." He leaned closer to the lens. "I know I kept you out. I know I said not to come. I was ashamed of what this place had been, of who I had become trying to forget it, but I always knew. One day, you'd come anyway, and when you did, I wanted you to find something worth holding on to." The screen faded to black. I stood there, still. The silence after his voice ended felt heavier than the air in the room, but I wasn't alone. I looked around at the walls, the photos, the careful arrangement of every object. This wasn't a museum of grief. It was a sanctuary, a place that had swallowed sorrow and spit back love. I walked to the bookshelf and ran my fingers across the spines. One of them felt out of place, thicker, hollow sounding. I pulled it gently. A small wooden box was hidden behind it. Inside were more photos. Notes Gabriel had written to himself. Grocery lists with Owen's handwriting scrawled on the bottom, and tucked in the very back was a birthday card addressed to me. It had never been sent. "Happy birthday, Mom. Owen baked a cake today. Vanilla, your favorite. I told him about how you used to cut slices into perfect triangles. He wants to meet you here next year." I said maybe. I hope I get brave enough to say yes. My legs folded beneath me, and I sat on the rug, that card clutched to my chest. I had come expecting to sell a house. Instead, I had found a living memory of a son who had loved me more deeply than I'd ever known how to ask. Later that afternoon, I opened the door to what must have been Gabriel's office. The room was modest, no more than 10 feet across, but the air inside was dense with something I couldn't quite name. The light filtering through the single window hit the dust in soft columns, like beams of memory suspended midair. On the desk sat a single spiral notebook, its corners frayed, pages bulging. A heavy manila envelope lay beneath it, sealed and slightly bent. I sat down slowly in the chair behind the desk. My fingers rested on the cover of the notebook for a moment before I opened it. His handwriting greeted me like a voice just behind my shoulder. The first entry was dated nearly 4 years ago, day 1. I've signed the papers. Kestrel Ridge is mine now. It feels strange. I drove up here with Owen in the back seat and your voice, Mom, in my head. Something about how places hold energy. This one, it holds ghosts. But maybe it can hold grace, too. I don't know. I just know I need to try. Each page was a window into the quiet corners of Gabriel's mind. He wrote about renovating the house, how he tore up floorboards in the barn and found initials carved into the beams from boys who had lived here decades ago. He wrote about Owen's first time seeing snow fall over the lake. He wrote about me, memories I'd forgotten, words I never knew had landed. Owen asked today why Grandma doesn't visit. I told him she's very far away. That was a lie. I couldn't bring myself to say the truth. I'm afraid of letting her see me like this. Afraid she'll see all the pieces that never quite came back together after Dad died. I turned the pages gently, my throat tightening with each one. The entries became more sporadic over time, shorter but no less honest. I thought healing would feel like a light switch, but it's more like the tide. It comes in, goes out, and sometimes all you can do is stand there and wait. Owen doesn't know it yet, but I've started looking into legal protections for the land. There's interest from some company about the water here. I don't trust them. I trust silence more. By the time I reached the final entry, Gabriel's handwriting had grown smaller, tighter. If anything happens to me, if I'm not around, I need her to have everything. Not just the land, the story, the reason. It's all here. It always was. I pressed the notebook to my chest and closed my eyes. I had come to this place expecting bricks and beams. Instead, I'd found confessions folded into pages, love stitched into margins. Then I reached for the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, there were documents. Legal records, spreadsheets, bank statements, and one thick printout with the words, Langley Holdings. Internal accounting stamped across the top. My stomach flipped. The Langley name wasn't unfamiliar. Gabriel had cousins on his father's side. The Langleys were old New England money, with land that stretched across counties and a reputation built on deals that never saw the light of day. I hadn't heard that name in years. I scanned the first few pages. There were line items, acquisitions, shell companies, and highlighted figures that seemed out of place. One note, scribbled in Gabriel's pen, read, Edward Langley has been trying to acquire Kestrel Ridge since I bought it. He wants the spring beneath the western hill. Not for nostalgia, for profit, water rights. He can't have them. I flipped to the back and found a smaller envelope inside, labeled in Gabriel's familiar handwriting. For Mom, if they ever come knocking. I opened it. Inside was a short letter. Mom, if Edward or anyone from that side of the family contacts you, don't panic. Don't sign anything. The documents enclosed are proof of financial misconduct. He's been laundering funds through a company listed as a water conservation group. If he pushes for a claim on the land, use this. I've verified everything through an independent auditor. It's all legal. June can help you if you need support. She's young, but she's sharp. I trust her. You're not alone in this. Love, Gabriel. I sat back in the chair, the envelope trembling in my lap. There it was. A storm I hadn't known was coming, already brewing in the distance. Gabriel had left me not just memories, but armor, quiet weapons wrapped in paper and ink. I looked out the window and saw the hills beyond the barn, the way the light caught on the slope where the spring must run beneath. It wasn't just land anymore. It was legacy. And now, I understood why he had kept it hidden for so long. Some truths aren't ready to be told until you're strong enough to carry them. I folded the documents back into the envelope and placed it gently beneath the notebook. The house was still silent, but now it no longer felt like a silence of absence. It was a silence that waited for me to decide what came next. It happened the next morning, barely after I'd finished pouring my second cup of tea. The knock at the door was sharp and deliberate, not the kind you hear from a neighbor dropping by with muffins or a child selling raffle tickets. It was the kind of knock that already knew its purpose. I set the cup down and walked slowly to the front door, heart ticking faster with each step. Through the side window, I saw a tall woman in a dark coat. Her hair pulled back so tightly it sharpened her cheekbones. She held a leather briefcase in one hand and a clipboard in the other. When I opened the door, the cold hit first, then her voice. "Mrs. Elwood?" she asked. "Yes. My name is Lena Mathers. I'm here on behalf of Edward Langley." She said it with the smoothness of someone used to delivering unwanted news. She didn't smile. I stepped aside, unsure whether to let her in or shut the door, but something about her demeanor made me think it would be better to hear whatever she had to say in the open. "I'll be brief," she continued, flipping through papers on her clipboard as though my name were just one of many she had said today. "Mr. Langley is asserting a familial claim on this property, Kestrel Ridge, on the basis of inheritance law within extended family lineage. Under Vermont Code, distant relations can seek review if a will omits substantial shared legacy property." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She looked up then, face perfectly still. "Mr. Langley believes this land was unfairly retained by your late son. There is reason to believe your son misrepresented the nature of ownership upon acquisition. Mr. Langley is prepared to pursue this through civil channels if necessary." Every word landed like ice against my skin. "He's filing a lawsuit?" I asked, slower now. "That would depend on your willingness to cooperate." She handed me a thick envelope. "These are preliminary notices of intent. You're encouraged to consult legal counsel before responding." I didn't take the envelope right away. My eyes stayed on hers. "I haven't spoken to Edward Langley in over 20 years, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "My son bought this land outright. If Mr. Langley had concerns, he had plenty of time to raise them, while Gabriel was alive." Lena didn't flinch. "Mr. Langley has documents that suggest otherwise." I took the envelope finally and pressed it to my chest like a shield. "Is that all?" "For now," she said, then added with a thin, almost performative nod, "You have a beautiful property. Shame, really, what families will do to each other over land." I watched her walk down the porch steps, her heels crunching the gravel. A black SUV waited at the gate. As she climbed in, the vehicle pulled away without hesitation, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. I stood in the open doorway for several minutes after she was gone, the morning air biting at my cheeks. My fingers clenched tighter around the envelope. Inside, I sat back at the desk where Gabriel's notebook still lay open. His handwriting stared up at me, those earlier entries filled with memory and hope. The envelope he'd left for me now felt prophetic. They had come knocking, and I hadn't even had time to grieve before being asked to fight. I opened the new envelope slowly. Pages upon pages of legal language, terms I didn't fully understand, allegations about misfiled deeds, questions about water rights, references to obscure estate clauses I'd never heard of. I wanted to crumble it all up and throw it in the fireplace, but I knew better. That kind of heat wouldn't make anything disappear. I reached for Gabriel's envelope again, the one he had labeled, "For Mom." Inside, beneath the letter, was a single business card. June Calhoun, Esquimer Calhoun and Perry Law Group, specializing in land rights and environmental law. There was a handwritten note beneath her name. She knows more than she lets on, and she hates the Langleys more than I ever did. I let out a breath that was part relief, part rage. So Edward was already circling when Gabriel was alive, and now that my son was gone, he thought I'd be easy prey. I looked out the window again, this time not at the lake or the trees, but at the land beneath it all. The ground Gabriel had fought to reclaim, the spring he had tried to protect, the memories he'd sealed into the walls of this house. They weren't just coming for soil, they were coming for his silence. And I was no longer willing to be quiet. The wind was rising by late afternoon, sweeping down from the mountains with a chill that pressed against the windows. I had just finished rereading Gabriel's last entries when I heard a knock again, softer this time, hesitant, not legal, human. When I opened the door, I recognized him immediately. "Thomas," I said. He smiled, the corners of his mouth hidden beneath a beard gone mostly gray. "Didn't think you'd remember me, Margaret. Been a long time." Thomas Rourke had been Gabriel's English teacher in high school, one of the few who had seen him during the years he'd stopped speaking much at home. Back then, Thomas was the kind of teacher kids listened to without understanding why. He saw beneath noise and silence alike. "I was passing through Brattleboro," he said, adjusting his scarf, "and I heard... I'm sorry, I heard about Gabriel." I stepped back and waved him in. "Come inside. You look cold." He took off his coat and glanced around the living room with the quiet awe of someone walking into a church. "So this is it," he said. "Kestrel Ridge. I've heard about this place my whole life, and now I'm standing in it." "You knew about it?" I asked, surprised. Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, and so did Gabriel. That's what I came to talk to you about." I led him into the kitchen. We sat at the table while I made fresh tea, the scent of bergamot rising between us. He warmed his hands on the mug, then set it aside. "Gabriel came to me 5 years ago," he began. "Said he was thinking of buying the property. Wanted my opinion. I didn't tell him what to do, but I did tell him the truth." He looked at me then, not unkindly. "This land has a history, Margaret. Not just family history, real history. Deep scars." I listened, my chest tightening. "Back in the 1960s, he continued, this place wasn't just a farm. It was a reform facility, a private one. The kind they used to send troubled boys to when the state didn't want them anymore. Harsh discipline, long hours, emotional isolation. The kind of place that never quite broke the law but never kept its conscience either." He reached into his coat pocket and slid out a folded newspaper clipping. The ink was yellowed, the edges frayed. Kestrel Ridge Youth. Reformation farm to close amid complaints. I scanned the article, my eyes catching on phrases like excessive labor, verbal degradation, and unlicensed counseling. Thomas waited before continuing. "Your father-in-law, Melvin, was one of the original investors. He thought discipline built character. When Gabriel was 12, he was sent here for the summer." My throat went dry. "I thought he went to music camp," I whispered. "That's what you were told," Thomas said gently. "But I saw him when he came back. He was different, quiet in a way that didn't feel like maturity. I tried to talk to him, but he shut down. Years later, he came to my office and told me the truth. He'd been forced to rise before dawn, clean stables, run in freezing rain, sit for hours in silence if he spoke out of turn. No beatings, but enough shame to keep scars." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. "I didn't know," I said. "Of course not," he replied. "That's the point of shame. It hides, buries itself. Gabriel never blamed you. He told me he came here not just to buy land, but to rewrite it." I looked out the window toward the barn. It stood like a witness. "He told me once," Thomas continued, "that he wanted to transform the place that hurt him into a space of healing. That's why he never let you come. He didn't want you to see it until it was ready, until he wasn't afraid of its shadows anymore." I stared at the floor. Everything in me ached. "He left so much behind," I said quietly. "No," Thomas corrected. "He left it for you. That's different." For a long moment we sat without words, only the kettle whistling softly behind us. Finally, I rose and pulled Gabriel's notebook from the shelf. I opened to one of the last entries and slid it across the table. Thomas read in silence, then closed it carefully and nodded. He never stopped loving you. You know that, don't you?" I nodded barely. "But love," he said, "isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like hiding until you're strong enough to return." He stood, took his coat, and gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping toward the door. "One more thing," he said. "Edward Langley knows this history too. He'll spin it if he needs to, but you—" He looked around the house. "You have the truth, and the truth, when spoken with quiet conviction, tends to carry further than you think." I watched him disappear into the gray mist of late afternoon, his car rumbling down the gravel path. Back inside, I stood by the front window for a long time. I wasn't just walking in Gabriel's footsteps anymore. I was walking with him, into the past, yes, but also towards something new. The door to the truth had been closed for decades, and now it was open. The first package arrived 2 days later. It was small, a brown paper box with no return address, sitting on the front steps like any ordinary delivery. I brought it inside with mild suspicion, thinking it might be something I'd ordered without remembering. But when I opened the box, I froze. Inside were children's books, new ones, hardcover editions of stories Owen loved: The Polar Express, Where the Wild Things Are, Charlotte's Web. On top was a handwritten note in blue ink, written in a script too smooth, too polished to feel sincere. For Owen, from family who never stopped thinking of him. No signature, no explanation, just that one line, and the slow, tightening sensation in my chest. I took the books to the back room and left them on a shelf I hadn't touched yet. They sat there like seeds of something unwanted, and I made a mental note to ask Owen about them carefully when the time felt right. But that was only the beginning. The next week, Owen and I were walking along the edge of the western field when we saw them. 2 figures at the bottom of the slope near the line of pines. A man and a woman, standing too still, looking too long. "Who's that?" Owen asked, tugging gently at my sleeve. I narrowed my eyes, shielding them from the late afternoon sun. The man was tall, his frame thick, his hair slicked back with the self-assurance of someone who believed he owned every inch of earth he walked on. He wore a wool overcoat too fine for farm country. The woman beside him stood with arms crossed, her chin slightly raised, surveying the property like a scout choosing where to strike. Edward Langley and his daughter, Rebecca. I hadn't seen Edward since my husband's funeral. He'd shaken my hand with forced warmth, said Gabriel was turning out sharp, and disappeared back to wherever it was that men like him lived. Boardrooms, golf, clubs, polished corridors lined with old paintings and older money. Now he was here, uninvited, unannounced. I placed a steadying hand on Owen's back and motioned for us to return to the house. I didn't want a scene, not in front of him, but before we could turn away, Edward called out, "Margaret!" His voice hadn't aged. It still had that faint note of performance, like every greeting came with a stage cue. "Just wanted to say hello," he said, walking closer. Rebecca followed, her boots silent in the dry grass. "We were in the area," he continued, "and thought we'd drop off a few things for the boy. Family should stay connected." I held Owen closer. "You've never once reached out to him. Not once in 8 years. Edward raised his hands in mock surrender. "We all make mistakes. I've come to correct mine." Rebecca stepped forward then. Her voice was cool and measured. "Gabriel never gave us a chance to be part of Owen's life. We're simply trying to change that." I looked at her carefully. There was no warmth in her tone, only calculation. "Gabriel had his reasons," I said, "and frankly, so do I." Edward's smile didn't waver, but it turned brittle at the edges. "There's no need for hostility. We're family, and Owen deserves to know where he comes from." "Where he comes from," I said, "is his father, and his father chose to raise him here, far from whatever empire you're trying to reclaim." Rebecca's expression didn't change. If anything, her eyes narrowed, not with anger, but curiosity, as if trying to gauge how deep I was willing to stand my ground. "We'll be in town for a few weeks," she said. "There's no pressure, just an open door." Edward reached into his coat and handed me a second envelope, this one thinner than the last, for when you're ready to talk like adults. Then they turned and walked away, leaving footprints in the field as bold as signatures. That night, Owen sat across from me at the dinner table, quietly pushing peas across his plate. "Grandma," he said, "those people, they told me they knew my dad, that they used to visit him when he was little." I set down my fork. "They said I'd like their house," he continued, "that they have a dog and a big pool and let kids play video games anytime." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the weight of the words settle. This wasn't just legal now, it was personal, strategic. They were starting with Owen, offering comfort and distraction disguised as affection. "They're your distant relatives," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean they know you, Owen, or that they know what's best for you." He looked down, nodding slowly. "They gave me a book, too, said my dad used to read it." My heart broke at the precision of it. "They're trying to make you feel special," I said gently, "but your dad already did that. He didn't want you to grow up around them for a reason." "Because they're bad?" "No," I whispered, "because they take things without asking. They take pieces of people." Owen was quiet for a long time. Then, in a small voice, he asked, "You won't let them take me, right?" I reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Not a chance," I said. But inside, I could feel it happening already. Cracks forming along the edge of our safety. The Langleys weren't just knocking on the door. They were finding ways to slip in through the windows. The next morning, I called the number Gabriel had left tucked inside that envelope marked, "For Mom." I'd read it twice before dialing, fingers hesitating above the keypad, heart tugging between weariness and duty. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe a voicemail, maybe someone too busy to care. Instead, she answered on the second ring. "June Calhoun speaking." Her voice was bright, steady, young. Too young, I thought, to carry the kind of weight I was about to unload. But then again, Gabriel had trusted her, and by now I'd learned to trust what he left behind. "June," I said, my voice a little hoarse. "My name is Margaret Elwood. Gabriel was my son." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, instantly warmer. "Mrs. Elwood, I've been expecting your call." "You have?" "He told me that if anything ever happened, you'd reach out eventually. I'm sorry for your loss. He spoke about you often, with love." That last word landed like a stone in a quiet pond. I swallowed. "Thank you. I think I need help. There's a lawyer, a woman named Lena Mathers. She delivered papers on behalf of Edward Langley. They're pressing a claim on the property." "I'm aware," June said. "I followed the filings. Quietly." "You've been watching?" "Gabriel didn't just hire me as a consultant. He gave me full access to the title records and water rights agreements he was drafting. He suspected Edward would make a move after. There was something reassuring in the way she spoke. Precise but not cold. Confident but never dismissive. "Could we meet?" I asked. "I'd rather do this face to face." "Of course," she said. "I can drive up tomorrow morning." True to her word, June arrived just past 10 the next day in a dusty Subaru with a cracked windshield and a back seat full of legal binders. She wore black jeans, a dark green blazer, and boots that looked like they'd waded through more than one property dispute. She smiled as she stepped onto the porch, extending a hand that was firm and steady. "You've got a beautiful place here," she said, glancing out toward the fields. "Depends on who you ask," I replied. We sat in the kitchen with tea and the thick envelope from Edward spread between us. June flipped through the papers quickly, brow furrowed. They're testing boundaries, she said after a moment. This isn't a formal lawsuit yet, more like an aggressive bluff, but they've layered it with just enough half-truths to cause doubt. I handed her Gabriel's documents, his handwritten notes, the accounting files, and the folder labeled Langley Holdings. Internal accounting. June took her time, reading carefully. When she finished, she looked up, eyes sharp with understanding. "This is gold," she said. "It's not just enough to push back. It's enough to put them on the defensive." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Gabriel was methodical," she added. "He spent the last 2 years preparing these records, cross-checking water rights, tracing ownership lineage, even contacting environmental consultants to protect the spring." She pulled a printout from her binder. "This," she pointed, "is a copy of a sealed offer from Aquaterra, the water management company. They've been trying to get exclusive access to the spring beneath the western field, but Gabriel refused to sign without including clauses about conservation and local control." I stared at the contract. "And now?" "If you're willing," June said, "we can reopen the negotiation. Use it to strengthen your legal position. With a signed contract in place, you hold leverage, not just as a landowner, but as a steward of a protected resource." I leaned back in my chair, heart racing. "Edward's not after the memories," I said softly. "He's after the water." June nodded. "He knows what it's worth, and he doesn't like that your son got there first." Silence settled between us. "I'm not used to fighting," I admitted. June smiled gently. "You don't have to be loud to be strong, Mrs. Elwood. Quiet people can still win. They just need the right tools and someone who believes in them." I looked down at Gabriel's papers. The key to the house still sat on the table between us. Its silver kestrel shimmered in the light. "He believed," I said. "Yes," she said, "and so do I." We agreed to begin the paperwork immediately. June would draft a formal response to Edward's claims, backed by Gabriel's documentation and our intention to protect the spring through Aquaterra's conservation terms. As she gathered her folders, she looked at me with a glint of something between pride and resolve. "Let them try," she said. "We're not just defending property. We're defending a legacy." When she left that afternoon, the wind had stilled. The lake outside shimmered quietly, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt the ground beneath my feet settle. Not with finality, but with purpose. I hadn't walked to the western field since arriving. Something about that part of the land felt distant, not just in miles, but in weight. Gabriel had mentioned it in his notebook briefly, always with a kind of reverence. He never wrote about it plainly. He called it the low hill. That hums. That morning, after June left with a folder full of strategy and a promise to return soon, I put on Gabriel's old coat and followed the narrow trail past the barn, down toward the trees. The western field was quieter than the rest of the property. The wind dropped as I descended the hill, like sound itself had been swallowed. My boots sank gently into the mossy earth as I reached a clearing lined with birch trees. At the center stood a flat stretch of ground with no grass, just soft, packed dirt and a faint scent of minerals in the air. I knelt beside a row of small stones arranged in a half circle, clearly placed, not natural. Beneath one of them, something caught the light. A brass cap, no bigger than my palm, was embedded in the soil, monitoring. Well 3, Aquifer Layer B. The label was worn but unmistakable. Gabriel had installed groundwater test sites here. I looked around. The trees rustled gently, as though listening. Back at the house, I found a folder marked Water Table Studies in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. Inside were graphs, scanned maps, and email printouts. One message stood out, sent from someone at Aquaterra to Gabriel just 6 months before he died. Preliminary results confirm exceptionally high purity in groundwater beneath Parcel 4, West Field. Estimated volume and flow suggest long-term viability for conservation or controlled extraction. We remain interested in future partnership. Attached to the email was a draft contract. Gabriel had signed it in pencil with a question mark beside his name. Below that, in his handwriting, was a single line. Only if Mom agrees. Only if it stays protected. My hands trembled slightly as I read. This wasn't just about money, it never had been. Gabriel had discovered something valuable and then refused to sell it outright. He had waited until he believed someone else would make the right choice. I picked up the phone and called June. Aquaterra offered a contract, I said. Gabriel didn't sign, but he left it here, and I think he wanted us to finish what he started. She was quiet for a second, then said, "That changes everything." Within 24 hours, June had arranged a call with Aquaterra's legal liaison. The representative, a woman named Marianne Graves, spoke with a kind of urgency that surprised me. She knew the property, knew Gabriel, knew the value of the spring beneath the field. "We've worked with families before," she said, "but this, Kestrel Ridge, is something rare, untouched, pristine. Your son was cautious, but his conservation priorities were clear. We'd like to honor that." June stepped in. "We want a binding contract, exclusive rights for Aquaterra to manage the spring under strict ecological terms, in exchange for permanent legal protection of the land's ownership." Marianne didn't hesitate. Agreed. By the end of the week, the documents were in hand. The agreement granted Aquaterra control over water management, but left all land rights with me. In return, they would publicly endorse my ownership and affirm environmental restrictions that would make Edward Langley's ambitions legally impossible. It was done. I signed my name on the last page, feeling the ink press into the paper like the closing of a long, aching breath. That night, I walked down to the field again, this time with Owen. He ran ahead, kicking leaves, his laughter echoing through the birch trees. "Why are we down here?" he asked. "Because your dad loved this place," I said, "and now it's ours to protect." He knelt beside the brass cap and tilted his head. "What's that?" "That," I said, smiling, "is water." He looked confused. "Water doesn't live underground." I crouched beside him. "Oh, but it does. It hides deep down, waiting for someone to listen." He nodded, still not quite understanding, but content. As we walked back up the hill, I looked out over the stretch of land and saw what Gabriel must have seen. Not just soil or trees or water, but a chance to turn pain into promise, to leave something better behind, to say, "I was here, and I tried." It didn't take long for Edward to sense he was losing ground. The first attack came through whispers. Neighbors in town, folks I barely knew, began calling with concern painted over their voices. They'd heard something, they said, about Gabriel, about Kestrel Ridge, about me. One woman, a cashier I'd only spoken to once, leaned across the counter and lowered her voice. "Someone said your son bought the farm under false pretenses, that he falsified something. You didn't know?" I stood still, letting her words hang in the air between us. She blinked, realizing too late that she was not speaking to gossip, but to a grieving mother with a steady spine. "I see," I said. "And who exactly is this someone?" She looked away. It wasn't just talk. Within days, a piece appeared in the local paper, a carefully crafted community concerns article, quoting anonymous sources about a disputed family estate and questions surrounding environmental transparency. There was no mention of Gabriel's name, but the timing was no coincidence, and the implication was clear. Something wasn't right at Kestrel Ridge. I sat at the kitchen table with the article in one hand and the signed Aquaterra contract in the other. They were trying to turn the public against me before the courts could decide. I called June. "They're getting nervous," she said calmly. "This is good. It means the documents we filed rattled them, but it also means they'll go low before they back off. They're smearing my son's name." "I know," she said, and they're hoping you'll get tired or scared or both. I wasn't scared. I was angry. The next letter from Lena Mathers arrived with more flair, this time delivered by courier, sealed in red-stitched leather, as if ceremony might replace substance. June reviewed the letter with barely concealed amusement. "They're claiming breach of familial duty," she said, raising an eyebrow, "that you're withholding ancestral land from its rightful bloodline. That's not legal language. That's Edward's ego talking." "And Rebecca?" I asked. "She's listed as co-signer, but her name's barely in the paperwork. My guess? She's the mouthpiece when he wants to appear progressive." I thought of Rebecca standing in the field that day, her voice cool and careful, not cruel, just detached, like she was executing strategy, not family reckoning. "What about Miles?" I asked. June gave me a look. "Edward's son?" "Yes. He was there, wasn't he?" She nodded. "He's named in the filings, but his involvement is vague. No personal signatures. Just family linkage. I'd bet he's not fully on board." "He didn't speak when they came." June leaned forward. "Then he might be the crack in the wall." The next evening, I found Miles on my porch. It was dusk. The wind had calmed. The trees rustled gently. He stood there, not like a Langley heir, but like a boy who'd wandered too far and didn't know how to turn back. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "I didn't invite him in, but I didn't send him away either. I don't agree with what my father's doing," he said quickly, "but I can't stop him. And Rebecca, she's convinced she's preserving some kind of legacy." "And you?" I asked. "I just wanted to meet my cousin's son," he said. "That's all I ever asked for." He looked down at his shoes. "They keep saying the land is ours, but it's not. Gabriel never belonged to us. He made his own family. He made his own peace." I studied his face, nervous, uncertain, but sincere. "I can't help you legally," he added, "but I can tell you something." I waited. "My father's trying to bribe the town council," he said quietly. "He's offering to build a rec center, pave roads, donate to the library, all contingent on correcting the ownership of Kestrel Ridge. He thinks if he wins public favor, the court won't matter." I exhaled slowly. The plan made sense for someone who saw the world as a chessboard. "Thank you for telling me," I said. Miles gave a small nod. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." When he left, I sat in the living room surrounded by the proof my son had left me. The letters, the water rights contract, the photos of Owen laughing under a sky full of birds. Edward was pulling every string he could. But I wasn't here to argue legacy. I was here to protect a boy, honor a son, and stand on land that had finally, after so many years, begun to feel like home. It was late morning when they arrived. I'd made no effort to prepare the house for guests. No coffee brewed, no fresh. Flowers, no tray of polite excuses. This wasn't a visit. This was a confrontation, and I wanted every inch of this home to speak for itself. They came in 2 black SUVs, tires crunching against the gravel like slow, deliberate footsteps. Edward stepped out first, dressed in charcoal gray as if preparing for a boardroom war. Rebecca followed, crisp and angular in her beige coat, her expression unreadable. Lena Mathers appeared last, briefcase in hand, eyes sweeping the property like a surveyor marking points of entry. June was already seated at the kitchen table when I opened the door to them. She didn't rise, didn't smile. She simply gestured toward the empty chairs across from us and said, "Please, let's begin." Edward sat with theatrical calm, folding his hands. "We'd like to settle this civilly, Margaret. There's no need to drag our family through drawn-out legal disputes." "Our family," I repeated quietly. "You didn't speak to Gabriel once in 15 years." He offered a well-practiced sigh. "Let's not dwell on old grievances. We're here to make a fair proposal." Rebecca slid a folder across the table. "We're prepared to offer a full estate buyout," she said. above market value, all legal fees covered, and a trust for Owen's future education. June didn't touch the folder. "We're not selling," I said. Edward smiled faintly. "You may want to reconsider. I've spoken to members of the town council. They'd be quite pleased to see this land managed by those with a, how shall I say it, proven ability to steward legacy." June leaned forward slightly. "Legacy doesn't override law, and Gabriel Elwood's rights were never in question." Lena cleared her throat. "If we're being frank, our side has prepared litigation strategies that could tie this property up for years. In that time, asset value deteriorates, community perception declines, and any revenue streams, such as water management contracts, may be placed under review." She looked at me as if expecting fear. Instead, I reached into the folder beside me and laid out 3 documents. "Then let's talk about deterioration," I said softly, "because what you're trying to erode is already protected." I slid the first paper forward. "The deed," I said, "legally transferred to Gabriel Elwood. No shared ownership, no gaps, no fraud." I placed the second document beside it. "The contract," I said, "signed and sealed with Aquaterra. Exclusive water rights management under strict conservation clauses. They've already filed endorsement letters with the court." Rebecca's posture shifted slightly. "And finally," I said, laying out the 3rd page, "internal financial documents showing your misuse of funds through Langley Holdings, including filings with shell companies under conservation pretense. Gabriel kept everything, and so have I." For the first time, Edward's mask cracked. His lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced at Lena, who stared at the table, expression unreadable. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't go public with that." I looked her straight in the eye. "I don't need to. I just need to make sure a judge sees it." Silence settled like dust after a storm. No one moved. Then June spoke. "If you walk away now, we won't pursue damages. But if you proceed, we're prepared to file for malicious interference and intentional emotional distress." Edward stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous." June remained seated. "What's ridiculous is thinking Margaret would surrender her son's life's work to satisfy your illusion of control." Rebecca stood more slowly. Her face remained unreadable, but her eyes lingered on Owen's crayon drawing still pinned to the wall behind me, a picture of a house, a tree, and a bird in flight. "We'll see how the court views all this," she said. "No," I replied. "You won't, because there won't be a trial." Edward turned sharply. "Don't be so sure." "Oh, I am," I said, "because deep down you're not here to win. You're here hoping I'll fold before you're exposed." I stood, facing them fully now. "But I've buried a son. I've sat through silence darker than any courtroom. You can't scare me with paper." Rebecca looked at her father, then back at me. Then she walked out. Edward followed, slower, his shoulders stiffer now, his coat too heavy for the truth he had just been handed. Lena trailed behind them, saying nothing. When the door closed, June finally let out a breath. "Well," she said, "that went better than I expected." I didn't reply right away. I walked to the window and watched the cars disappear down the drive. "They came with power," I said quietly, "but they left with none." June nodded. "They underestimated silence." "No," I said. "They underestimated love. It didn't unravel all at once. Men like Edward Langley rarely fall in a single day. They fray at the edges, threads pulled loose by things they believe are beneath them. Paperwork, witnesses, women who don't flinch. 3 days after the meeting at my kitchen table, June filed a motion with the county clerk's office. Not a lawsuit, but a protective injunction, one that cited our water rights contract, documented financial threats, and formally named Langley Holdings as a potential party of interest in a land exploitation scheme. It made the local news by nightfall. The headline was cautious. Family dispute escalates over historic Vermont farm and water rights. But the article was not. The journalist had done their homework, likely with June's quiet help. They referenced Gabriel's conservation efforts. They quoted experts on aquifer protections. They even included a photo of me standing on the porch with Owen, sunlight behind us like a quiet shield. What the piece didn't show, but what everyone in town felt, was the shift in public wind. For decades, the Langley name had carried weight. It opened doors, bent rules. But now, that same name was starting to stain headlines and stir suspicion. By the end of the week, one of Edward's community improvement donations was declined by the town council. The library board issued a statement affirming its neutrality. A planned Langley-sponsored trail project in the western woods was paused indefinitely. The cracks deepened. And then, on a rainy Thursday morning, Edward Langley walked into the county courthouse and tried to file an emergency petition to freeze the estate of Kestrel Ridge. He was met with a judge who had already read the article, a clerk who had already seen the injunction, and a legal assistant who, according to June, told him, without blinking, "We've been expecting you." The petition was denied before noon, but that wasn't the real collapse. That came later that afternoon when Lena Mathers arrived at my door, alone and without her briefcase. She looked tired. Her coat was damp at the shoulders. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I won't be representing the Langleys anymore," she said. "I wanted you to hear it from me." I nodded, offering nothing more than silence. She hesitated. "I read your son's journals." Edward shared them, thinking they made Gabriel look unwell. They didn't. They made him look human and brave. I still didn't speak. "I'm sorry," she said at last, "for what you've lost and what you've had to protect." I closed the door gently behind her. The next call came from Miles. He didn't leave a voicemail, just a single text. "I've moved out. I won't be part of this anymore. I hope Owen remembers the kite we built." I read it twice, then deleted it. Some things didn't need keeping. That evening, Rebecca called. Her voice was clipped, her words precise, but there was something different in her tone. Not defeat, not apology, something emptier. "You've won," she said. "Enjoy it." "I didn't win," I replied. "I endured." Silence. Then she said softly, "He really did love this place, didn't he?" "Yes," I said, "and everything he built here was to protect a boy from becoming a man like your father." I didn't hear from her again. The air at Kestrel Ridge shifted after that, not just in the legal sense, though that part too was done. Edward never filed another motion. Aquaterra issued a public statement affirming their exclusive conservation contract. June began the process of drafting a land trust to ensure permanent protection for the spring, the forest, and the house. But more than that, the silence around me changed. It was no longer filled with the noise of what might come, no longer charged with fear or tension. It became a softer kind of quiet, a quiet that sounded like peace. One morning, I stood on the porch with Owen beside me. He held a paper kite in his hands, its tail fluttering in the breeze. Gabriel had drawn a kestrel on it in faint pencil marks before he died, lines that faded now in the light, but hadn't disappeared. "Can we go to the hill?" Owen asked. "Yes," I said, and we walked. The battle had ended not with a bang, but with silence that couldn't be broken, not by rumor, not by money, not by legacy born of greed. Edward Langley hadn't been defeated in court. He'd been undone by truth. The hill overlooking the lake had become our place. Owen liked to go there in the early evening, when the sky softened into blues and golds, and the trees cast long, gentle shadows over the fields. He'd run ahead with his kite tucked under his arm, his small feet leaving fresh tracks in the grass, as if rewriting the path his father had once walked alone. I brought a blanket that day and laid it out near the bench Gabriel had built. A simple thing, just wood and nails, but worn smooth by years of weather and silence. I sat with my hands folded, watching Owen twist the kite's string through his fingers like he was weaving it into something bigger than the sky. After a while, he sat beside me. The wind tugged softly at his hair. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Grandma, why didn't Dad want you to come here?" His voice was light, but the question hung heavy between us. One I knew would come, one I'd tried 100 times to answer in my mind. I turned toward him, watching the worry flicker just beneath his calm. He wasn't angry. He was searching for truth, for belonging, for the part of his father that still lingered in our answers. "Because," I said gently, "your dad was trying to fix something." "Fix what?" "He was hurt here, a long time ago, before he was even your age. People treated him badly, people who were supposed to help." Owen looked down at the ground. "Did he tell you?" I nodded. Not at first. It took him time to find the words. And the strength. He fidgeted with a blade of grass. "Why didn't he want you to see it?" I reached over and brushed his hair from his forehead, just the way I used to when he was a baby and couldn't sleep. "Because he didn't want me to remember it the way he did. He wanted to change it first, to make it better, and he did." "But he could have asked for help," Owen said quietly. "Yes," I whispered. "He could have. But sometimes people think they have to carry everything alone, especially the parts that hurt the most." Owen looked out over the water, his eyes full of thought. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I don't want to keep secrets like that when I grow up." I felt the air catch in my throat. "I hope you never do," I said. "But if you ever feel like something's too heavy to carry, I want you to remember, you don't have to be alone." He leaned his head against my shoulder then, still small enough to fit there, but growing every day into a boy his father would have been proud of. After a while, he spoke again. "Dad really loved you, didn't he?" I smiled, tears blurring the edges of the lake in the distance. "He did," I said, "even when he didn't know how to show it, even when he was hurting." Owen was quiet, but this time it felt peaceful. And then, as the wind picked up again, he asked, "Can I fly the kite now?" "Go," I said, brushing his back lightly. "Let's see how high it'll go today." He ran across the field, laughter trailing behind him like the kite's long red tail. I sat on that bench and watched as the kestrel rose into the air, its wings catching the wind, dancing between clouds. Gabriel's sketch still faintly visible on its frame. In that moment, nothing hurt, not in the old way. There was sorrow, yes, but also light, also sky, also hope, with a string in a boy's hand and a mother's memory stitched into fabric. And when Owen turned around and waved to me from across the field, smiling wide, I felt something loosen inside me. Not everything needed to be answered. Some things only needed to be witnessed. It was Owen's idea. The painting, I mean. We were sitting at the kitchen table one rainy afternoon. The windows steamed from the soup I'd left simmering on the stove. The fields outside were blurred and gray, the lake hidden beneath a curtain of mist. Owen had pulled out his colored pencils and was scribbling quietly, tongue pressed to the corner of his lip, eyebrows furrowed in concentration. When he finished, he slid the paper across the table to me. "This is us," he said. I looked down. It was a sketch, not precise, but full of feeling. He'd drawn me with my hair in a bun, sitting on a bench beneath a tree, himself beside me, arms stretched toward the sky. And above us, a large bird with wings open wide, flying high above the field. "The hawk," he said proudly, "like the one on the kite." "Kestrel," I whispered. He nodded, pleased that I remembered. Later that week, I found a canvas in the attic. Gabriel had left it there, still wrapped in brown paper. I set it on the easel by the window, unwrapped it, and stared at the empty white for a long time before touching a brush to paint. I'm not a painter by trade. I used to doodle in the margins of books when I worked at the library, but this felt different. This was a story I didn't know how to tell with words, so I painted instead. Each morning, while Owen played outside or napped on the couch, I added a little more. The hill, the lake, the house, the trees that lined the western field. I painted Gabriel from memory, just his outline at first, then his shoulders, then the slope of his back as he stood at the edge of the clearing, looking up. The kestrel came last. Wings stretched wide, tail flaring, its shape caught in mid-glide. I painted it soaring above us. Me, Owen, Gabriel, our figures small but grounded, together, even across time. The final brushstroke was a thin line of golden light across the horizon. Dawn or dusk. I never decided. The day I finished the painting, Owen and I walked down to the lake. It was a clear afternoon, the sky impossibly wide. He held the kite Gabriel had made months before, the one we'd patched together with new string and a stitched seam along the wing. He'd colored over his father's faint sketch, tracing the lines more boldly as if saying, "This still matters." He ran to the top of the slope, let the wind catch the fabric, and laughed as the kestrel rose again, higher and higher. I stood at the bottom of the hill, arms crossed against the chill, watching the boy and the wind and the sky hold each other like old friends reunited. There were no more letters to read, no more papers to sign. The lawsuits had faded into quiet. The Langley name had receded into its own silence, and the property, once again, belonged only to the ones who cherished it. I'd started writing in Gabriel's notebook, not to replace him, to stand beside him. Small notes, thoughts, recipes Owen liked, fragments of days I didn't want to forget. I wrote about the sound of the rain at night, the way the lake shimmered at dawn, the way Owen's laughter sometimes sounded like Gabriel's when he was very small. I wrote about healing, not as an ending, but as something that unfolded slowly, like wings lifting after a long rest. That night, I stood at the easel once more and signed the corner of the painting, M. Elwood. Underneath, in smaller letters, I wrote, "We came home." Owen was asleep upstairs, the kite folded neatly beside his bed. Outside, the moon rose over the trees, casting a silver glow across Kestrel Ridge. I opened the window, let the night air drift in, and listened to the soft hush of the earth settling into itself. In the distance, a kestrel called once, sharp, proud, and free. And I understood finally what Gabriel had meant when he wrote that some things take flight only when they are ready. We were ready, and we were still rising.